Alright, man, let me tell you about the day we almost burned down the lab. No joke. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. My name's Mike, been an organic chemist for, well, over 3 decades now. But back then, it was 1998. I was about 32, working at the university lab, running some wild experiments trying to synthesize new polymers for industrial coatings. You know, back then the lab was different. No fancy automation, no AI warnings, just us, a fume hood, some glassware, and a lot of, hey, what happens if we tweak this part of the process? You could call it adventurous chemistry. We were funded on grants, so we had that little rebellious freedom, try stuff, push a bit beyond the standard protocol. And sometimes, well, sometimes they caught up with us. There's this one particular day. I'll never forget it. We were working on a modification for a polymer structure, trying to improve its thermal resistance and flexibility at the same time, tricky stuff. And, of course, in the spirit of saving time, we skipped a couple of little steps. You know how it is, thinking, I've done this dozens of times, what could go wrong? Famous last words, right? I remember it was me, one younger assistant, Sam, sharp guy, very methodical, and Lisa, a new grad student. It was actually her first week running reactions with me. Poor thing had no idea what kind of experience she was about to get. Now, I'm not saying we were reckless, but let's be honest, sometimes when you think you know enough, that's when you get blindsided. And this one nearly cost us the whole lab. The way that reaction went sideways, man, just thinking about it still makes me pause. I can still hear the humph sound when the flask lit up, and the panic. Yeah, that was real. But hey, before I dive into the full story, if you're into wild behind-the-scenes chemistry stories, real lab life, the good, the bad, and the what were we thinking moments, go ahead, hit that like button, maybe subscribe. Drop a comment if you've ever had your own oops moment in the lab. I'd love to hear it. Seriously. I mean, we all have them, even if we don't always talk about it. All right, ready? Let me take you back to that day. Because what happened next? Well, I promise, it wasn't in any of the textbooks. You know, sometimes people ask me, Mike, how do you even get into chemistry? And honestly, it wasn't some childhood dream or big moment of inspiration. I just liked figuring out how things worked. I was that kid who'd take apart radios and mix stuff in the garage, much to my mom's horror. By the time I hit college, organic chemistry was the thing that really clicked for me. It wasn't just about memorizing reactions, it was like solving puzzles, piece by piece. You take these tiny molecules, you tweak a bond here, change a group there, run it through the right conditions, and suddenly you've got a whole new material that didn't exist before. That was pure magic to me. So fast forward, in '98, I'd already been working about 7 years. Not a rookie anymore, but not some seasoned veteran either. Right in that phase where you feel confident, sometimes a little too confident. You know what I mean? I was with the university's polymer chemistry group. We weren't some big corporate R&D lab. It was this old school university setup, dusty floors, glassware everywhere, handwritten notes stacked sky high. But we had freedom. The lab was mostly funded through grants, so we could chase ideas a bit outside the box as long as we showed results. That kept it exciting. Days were long. Most of us were in by 8 or 9 in the morning, but there were plenty of nights when I'd still be in the lab at midnight, tweaking a reaction, checking on polymerization runs. The team was small but tight. There was our lead professor, of course, brilliant guy, very hands-off though. He gave us space to run with ideas, trusted us to handle things. Then there was a rotating group of grad students and assistants. In '98, I had Sam, about 2 years out of his master's, super precise, the kind of guy who double-checks everything. And Lisa, brand new PhD student. Just a week into the program. Bright eyes, tons of enthusiasm, still learning the ropes. And then there was me kind of in between. New enough to be trusted with the bigger projects, but still young enough to think, maybe if I push this reaction just a bit, I can save us a few hours. That attitude, yeah, sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Life back then, well, it wasn't as buttoned up as labs are now. No electronic safety checklists, no software watching every step. We had protocols written down, Sure, but there was this culture of, if you know what you're doing, you can adjust. People came in and out of the lab all the time. Coffee cups balanced next to flasks. It was alive. Messy, but alive. We worked hard, but we also had fun. Chemistry jokes pinned to the fume hood. Everyone had a story about a reaction that didn't go as planned. And in that environment, well, things could happen fast if you weren't careful. I guess, personality-wise, I've always been kind of curious, maybe a little impulsive in the lab. I liked pushing the edge of what we could do. Sometimes I'd get this gut feeling, hey, if we change this solvent, we might get a better yield, and I'd go for it. Most times it worked out fine, but this one day, well, this day was different, and it taught me a lesson I still carry with me now, after all these years. But we'll get there. Hang on. So, let me take you back to that morning in late '98. The lab was buzzing, but not in a crazy way, more like that focused kind of buzz you get when everyone's chasing a deadline but also kind of enjoying the grind. The sun was just peeking through the windows, casting these long shadows across the worn-out benches and cluttered shelves. There was this familiar smell, a mix of solvents, fresh glassware, and, honestly, a little burnt plastic from some earlier experiments. Yeah, the place had character. It was me, Sam, and Lisa that day. Sam, the assistant, was already deep into prepping samples, meticulously measuring reagents with that precision that you just can't fake. He's the kind of guy who never rushes, always triple-checking his work. It's funny, I used to think he was a bit too cautious, but after that day, I realized his caution might have saved our skins. Lisa, on the other hand, was still wide-eyed, fresh from the lecture halls and textbooks, eager to learn but not quite ready for the chaos a real lab throws at you. She was shadowing me, taking notes, asking questions like, why do we heat this mixture exactly at 80 degrees? Or, what happens if we skip the drying step? Man, I could see the gears turning in her head. That thirst for knowledge was unmistakable. We were working on modifying a polymer to improve its flexibility without losing thermal stability. Sounds straightforward, but trust me, it was anything but. The whole project was on a tight schedule because the grant we got had this looming deadline, and pressure was high. I remember glancing at my watch, feeling the usual mix of excitement and stress that comes with pushing boundaries in the lab. Now, here's where things start to get interesting. We had a standard protocol for the reaction, precise steps on solvent ratios, temperature ramps, timing, all designed to keep the reaction smooth and safe. But, well, to be honest, I was feeling a bit impatient that day. You know how it goes. You've run a reaction 100 times, and sometimes you think, hey, what if I tweak this one step? Maybe we can shave off some time. That's when the trouble began. I suggested to Sam and Lisa that we try skipping one of the solvent drying steps. It was risky, sure, but I told them, trust me, it'll be fine. We've done similar reactions before. Sam looked a bit uneasy, but Lisa seemed curious, eager to see what would happen. So we went ahead. I still get a little cringe thinking about that moment because that small decision was like lighting a fuse on a firecracker. We set up the reaction mixture, watched it carefully as it started to warm up. For a while, everything seemed normal. The color was right, the viscosity was on point. But then, out of nowhere, the temperature shot up way faster than it should have. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then came the fumes. Not the usual harmless ones, but something sharp, almost biting. That's when I realized we'd made a mistake. Big one. Lisa's eyes widened. Sam started moving quickly, reaching for the fume hood controls, but the reaction was already spiraling. That's when the flask just exploded into flames. Not a huge explosion, more like a sudden whoosh of fire, but enough to catch the nearby equipment and part of the ventilation on fire. The whole lab turned chaotic in seconds. Man, I still remember the rush of adrenaline, the shouts, the scramble to grab the fire extinguisher. Everyone was shouting instructions, but honestly, I was frozen for a second, that oh no moment hitting me hard. Thankfully, Sam's calmness kicked in fast. He grabbed the extinguisher, and together we put the fire out before it could spread further. The automatic sprinklers never even had a chance to turn on. That day wasn't just about a near fire. It was about the people in that lab, their trust, their quick thinking, and yeah, a little bit of my own stubbornness. Sam and Lisa, Those two saved the day as much as I did, if not more. And Lisa? Well, that day probably taught her more about real chemistry than any textbook ever could. But let me tell you, that morning was the beginning of one of the most intense and humbling experiences of my career. What started as just another experiment quickly turned into a story we still tell every time a new person walks through the door. You think you know the risks, but sometimes the lab will remind you just how real they are. All right, I'm not going to leave you hanging. Next up, I'll tell you exactly what went down when the reaction went wild, how close we really came to disaster, and what lessons I learned that I still carry with me. Stay tuned. So, things started going south pretty quickly. At first, it was just a little unexpected, the mixture heating faster than usual. I remember glancing at the thermometer and thinking, that's odd. You know, when you're in the lab, there's always little quirks, little signs that something might be off, but you try to tell yourself it's fine. I told Sam and Lisa, keep an eye on it, but no big deal. Man, I should have known better. That's the moment when that tiny feeling of something's wrong starts creeping in, but you push it aside because you want the experiment to work, you want the data, you want the breakthrough. But then the temperature just didn't stop climbing. It was creeping up faster and faster, way beyond the safe limits we had in the protocol. The reaction was going out of control, and those fumes started to get thicker, sharp, irritating, and not at all like the usual solvents we worked with. I could see Lisa pulling her scarf up over her nose, and Sam was already moving towards the fume hood controls, but by then, it was too late to contain it with just ventilation. That's when the real dilemma hit me. Do we shut everything down immediately and lose the batch, or try to ride it out and hope the reaction settles? I can tell you, in that moment, your brain just races. You weigh the risks, the time and money invested, the pressure from the grant, the deadlines looming over us. I thought, maybe if we adjust the cooling a bit, we can stabilize it. But deep down, there was that nagging voice whispering, don't push it. Then, bam, the flask erupted in flames. Not a massive explosion, but a sudden burst of fire that caught the edge of the bench and, worst of all, part of the ventilation system above us. The heat was intense, the smoke thick and fast spreading through the lab. I could see Lisa's eyes wide with panic, and Sam was already grabbing for the fire extinguisher. Everything happened so fast, but somehow, my heart was pounding like crazy. There's this split second where you're both frozen and moving at the same time, trying to figure out what to do next. We all scrambled. The fire extinguisher was our only hope because the sprinklers hadn't kicked in yet. They were slow, or maybe the sensors didn't catch the fire immediately. Sam and I worked together to put out the flames before it could spread to anything else. It was chaotic, stressful, and honestly, I was scared, not just for myself, but for Lisa too. She was new, and I could tell the whole thing shook her up big time. That moment really hammered home how thin the line is between a successful experiment and disaster in the lab. One small deviation from the protocol, one skipped step, and suddenly you're staring down the barrel of a fire hazard. It's a humbling experience. I mean, you think you're in control, but the chemicals remind you who's boss. After we got the fire under control, there was this heavy silence. The adrenaline was wearing off, and reality started to sink in. We were lucky, no one was hurt. The lab wasn't destroyed, but that near miss, it left a mark. I looked at Sam and Lisa and realized how important teamwork and staying calm are in moments like that. We'd all learned something that day, the hard way. And here's the kicker. Even though everything went sideways, I still remember thinking, man, what if we hadn't reacted fast enough? What if the fire had spread to the whole lab? That thought kept me up at night for a while. It made me rethink how I approached experiments and safety. From that day on, no more shortcuts. No more, let's try this just once moments without triple checking every step. So yeah, that's how the situation spiraled. A perfect storm of impatience, a little overconfidence, and just plain bad timing. But if you stick around, I'll tell you what happened next, how we dealt with the fallout, how the team handled the aftermath, and the surprising way we all grew from this near disaster. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. All right, Now we're at the part where things got really intense, the moment I'll never forget, the one that still makes me catch my breath when I think back. So, picture this. The flask is suddenly engulfed in flames, and the lab goes from calm to chaos in a heartbeat. The heat hits you instantly, like stepping into a furnace, and the smoke starts swirling around, thick and suffocating. You can barely see, but you hear everything. Alarms blaring, people shouting, the hiss of the fire extinguisher being pumped. Man, it was like being caught in a movie, except this was real life, and there was no director yelling, "Cut." I remember standing there, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Time slowed down in this weird way. Every second stretched out like minutes. Lisa was frozen near the door, eyes wide as saucers, clearly terrified but not moving. Sam was already moving fast, grabbing the fire extinguisher and shouting, "Mike, here." I felt this surge of adrenaline and snapped out of my momentary paralysis. Grabbing the extinguisher, we both lunged at the flames, trying to smother them before they could leap to the cabinets, or worse, the ventilation system, which was already starting to smoke. The fire hissed and crackled as the foam sprayed over it. I remember thinking, "Come on, hold." The heat was unbearable, sweat pouring down my face, the acrid smell of burnt chemicals filling my lungs despite the mask. Every second felt like a battle. One wrong move, and it could have exploded further or spread out of control. But somehow, between Sam's quick thinking and Lisa finally snapping out of shock to help, we managed to contain it. I'll never forget the look on Lisa's face after the fire died down. A mix of relief, shock, and something else. Respect, maybe. Like she'd just been initiated into a club nobody really wants to join, but everyone in the lab eventually does. That moment right there, it wasn't just about the fire, it was about the lesson searing itself into our minds. But here's the crazy part. Right after we thought it was over, I noticed a faint crackling noise coming from the ventilation hood. Turns out, part of it had caught fire and was smoldering inside, hidden from sight. We had to act fast again, pulling emergency switches, opening windows, even calling campus safety to make sure the building wouldn't be compromised. That second scare was a harsh reminder that in chemistry, the danger doesn't always stop when the flames do. As the adrenaline finally wore off and the lab settled into a tense quiet, I looked around at my team. Sam was catching his breath, Lisa was quietly processing everything, and me, I just felt this deep mix of guilt and gratitude. Guilt because my impatience and that skipped step had nearly caused a disaster, and gratitude that we got out of it without serious injury or worse. That day marked a turning point, not just in that project, but in how I approached every experiment afterward. It was a real eye-opener. You think you're invincible when you've got experience, but the lab always has a way to humble you. And honestly, that's a good thing, because respect for what you're working with, for the chemicals, for the protocols, for your team, that's what keeps you safe. Looking back, man, it was crazy. I still laugh about some of the chaos, but deep down I know how serious it was. The moment when you're staring fire in the face and the only thing between you and disaster is your team and a well-used extinguisher, that's something I wouldn't wish on anyone, but it's also one of the most unforgettable days of my life. And now, I'm curious, have you ever had a moment where things spiraled so fast you barely caught your breath? What did you learn? Drop a comment below, because trust me, these stories, they're the real lessons. So, after the fire was finally out and the initial panic started to fade, we had to figure out what came next. The lab was a mess, scorched equipment, smoke stains, a lingering smell of burnt chemicals that no amount of ventilation could shake off immediately. But honestly, the biggest mess was the sinking feeling in my gut. I knew this was going to be one of those moments that changes everything, at least for a while. First off, we checked that everyone was okay. Physically, thankfully, no one was hurt. No burns, no injuries, just a lot of shaken nerves. Lisa, especially, was quiet. I could tell she was replaying every second in her head. Sam and I exchanged looks, a mix of relief and what the heck just happened. We cleaned up what we could that day, but the real cleanup would take weeks. Some equipment had to be replaced, and the ventilation system definitely needed a serious overhaul. Now, the university wasn't thrilled about the incident. Obviously, there was a quick meeting with safety officers, the department head, and us. To be honest, it wasn't the formal investigation you might expect in a big corporation, but it was serious enough to send a clear message. Protocols are there for a reason, and shortcuts have consequences. We weren't officially reprimanded, but let's just say the mood in the lab got a bit more by the book after that. One thing I have to say, the way the team came together after the incident was incredible. Sam and Lisa, they showed a lot of maturity and professionalism. Lisa even joked later that she'd gotten the most intense chemistry lesson possible. We all laughed, but it was true. That fire became the story we told every new lab member, not as a scare tactic, but as a real reminder of respect and responsibility. For me personally, that day was a wake-up call. I stopped cutting corners, no matter how tempting it seemed. Every step in a protocol was there because someone learned the hard way, sometimes painfully hard. The freedom we had in the lab was still there, but now it came with a deep respect for the risks involved. I got more involved in safety training too, making sure no one else made the same mistake. And honestly, despite everything, it became a defining moment in my career. It shaped how I teach, how I mentor younger chemists, and how I approach every experiment. You know, sometimes the toughest lessons leave the biggest impact. That fire reminded me that no matter how confident you are, humility is key in this job. Looking back now, I'm grateful it wasn't worse. We learned, we adapted, and we moved forward stronger and safer. It's funny how moments that seem like disasters turn into the stories you carry with pride years later. The lab eventually got fixed up, the new safety measures implemented, and Lisa went on to become one of the best researchers I've worked with. So that's how the story ended, with a lot of lessons learned, some charred glassware, and a newfound respect for the power we handle every day. But hey, what about you? Have you ever had a moment where things didn't go as planned but ended up teaching you something important? Share your story down below. I'd love to hear it. Because in the end, it's those moments that make us better at what we do. You know, after that whole incident, I didn't just walk away with a checklist of what went wrong. It stuck with me on a much deeper level. I remember driving home that evening, my hands still shaking a bit from the adrenaline, and thinking, man, this could have been so much worse. It wasn't just about the fire or the lab, it was about how close we all were to losing something bigger. Trust, safety, and even our own confidence. For a few days, I kept replaying everything in my mind, wondering how a single choice to skip a step could spiral into almost burning down the place. It was humbling, no doubt about it. That experience changed how I looked at my work and my responsibility as a chemist. It made me realize that science isn't just about discovery and progress, it's about respect. Respect for the materials, for the protocols, and most importantly, for the people around you. I started seeing safety not as a boring rulebook, but as the backbone of everything we do. Because, honestly, without that backbone, the whole thing just falls apart. I also think it taught me a lot about humility. When you've been in the game a while, it's easy to get confident, maybe even a little cocky. I was definitely guilty of that back then, thinking I knew better, trying to shave time off procedures. But that day, the lab reminded me who's really in charge. It's the chemicals, the reactions, and the rules born from decades of trial and error. You don't mess with that. On a personal level, I felt a strange mix of relief and responsibility. Relief that no one got hurt, and responsibility to make sure something like that never happens again, not just for me, but for everyone working with me. It pushed me to be a better mentor, to take safety training seriously, and to encourage the younger chemists to respect the process, no matter how tempting shortcuts might seem. Looking back now, I see that moment as a turning point. It was painful but necessary, and honestly, it made me a better chemist and a better teammate. Sometimes, the toughest lessons leave the biggest marks, but they also give you the biggest growth. And that's a lesson I carry with me every day in the lab. You know, after all the chaos and the smoke cleared, I realized this whole experience wasn't just about a lab accident. It was a lesson about respect and responsibility in a way that sticks with you. It's funny how sometimes you think you're too experienced to make rookie mistakes, but the truth is, No matter how many years you have under your belt, chemistry always has surprises waiting. The biggest takeaway for me? Never underestimate the power of small steps. Every protocol, every safety measure is there because someone learned the hard way. And trust me, you don't want to be the one learning it the hard way yourself. But it's not just about rules. It's about understanding that being a good chemist means balancing curiosity with caution. You can push boundaries, try new things, and innovate, absolutely, but never at the expense of safety. The thrill of discovery is amazing, but it doesn't mean risking everything on a hunch or impatience. That day taught me that progress is a marathon, not a sprint. Sometimes the smartest move is patience and precision, not rushing ahead. And here's something else. Teamwork matters more than you think. That fire could have been a disaster if it weren't for Sam and Lisa stepping up, keeping calm, and acting fast. Chemistry isn't a solo sport. It's about trust and watching each other's backs. So respect for your team is just as important as respect for the chemicals you handle. So yeah, if there's one thing I carry with me from that near disaster, it's this. Respect the process, respect the people, and respect the power of what you're working with. That's what keeps the lab, and the people in it, safe. And honestly, that respect is what makes you a better chemist in the long run. So, what happened after that near disaster? Well, that story quickly became something of a legend around the lab. I mean, not the kind of legend you brag about, but more like a cautionary tale that every new person heard on their very first day. Remember the time Mike almost burned the place down, they'd say, usually with a chuckle and a shake of the head. It was our way of reminding everyone that the lab is serious business and that shortcuts can come with serious consequences. But for me, personally, that day marked a real turning point. I never ran an experiment the same way again. I got more meticulous, more patient, and honestly, a little more cautious, which, looking back, was probably overdue. I took safety training seriously, and I made it a priority to mentor the younger chemists on the importance of following protocols. Because trust me, no data is worth risking your safety or the safety of your team. Interestingly, the lab culture shifted a bit too. After that incident, we tightened up our procedures. The freedom we had to play around with reactions didn't disappear, but there was definitely more respect for the rules. Everyone seemed more aware of the risks, and communication improved. We started having quick safety check-ins before each new experiment, something we hadn't done regularly before. And as for me and my team, we kept pushing forward with our research, but with a newfound seriousness. Lisa, who was brand new during that fire, went on to become one of the most careful and dedicated researchers I've ever worked with. Sam? Well, he became my go-to guy whenever I needed someone to double-check things. Honestly, that story shaped a big part of my career. It taught me that sometimes the most important breakthroughs happen outside of the chemistry itself, in the way we respect the process and protect each other. And even after all these years, whenever someone asks me about my most memorable experiment, that day comes to mind. Not because it was a success in the lab, but because it reminded me what being a chemist really means. So yeah, that's what came next. A little scar on the lab's history, but a big lesson for all of us. And I'm curious, have you ever had a moment that changed the way you work or think about what you do? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your story. So here we are, at the end of this story that still sticks with me after all these years. You might think it's just about a lab fire, a near miss, some charred equipment. But really, it's about what happens when confidence meets caution, when curiosity pushes boundaries but respect keeps you grounded. It's about how a split-second decision can change the course of your day, your career, even your life. And yeah, it's about those moments that remind you to never take your safety or your team for granted. Now, I've shared this with you not just to tell a wild lab tale, but to ask you something that's been on my mind ever since that day. When you're faced with a choice between rushing ahead or slowing down, between shortcutting or sticking to the plan, what do you really do? Have you ever made a decision that you knew was risky, maybe even reckless, because you thought you could handle it? And if so, how did that turn out? I'm not here to judge. Honestly, we all do it at some point. But what I want to know is this: if you could go back, would you do it differently? Would you take that extra time, follow the rules, or trust your gut and push forward anyway? It's a tough question, and maybe a little uncomfortable. But sometimes those questions spark the best conversations. So drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories, your lessons, your moments of what was I thinking? Because sharing these experiences is how we learn, grow, and keep each other safe. And hey, if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real-life chemistry adventures, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for sticking around. Stay curious, but always stay safe. I'll catch you in the next one.